We are on part 4 of The Hobbit, on chapter 1. Let's continue. On the table, in the light of the big lamp with a red shade, he spread a piece of parchment, rather like a map.
"This was made by Thror, your grandfather, Thorin,"
he said in answer to the dwarves' excited questions.
"It is a plan of the mountain."
I don't see how that will help us much, said Thorin disappointedly after a glance. I remember the mountains well enough and the lands about it, and I know where Mirkwood is and the withered heath where the great dragons breed.
"There is the dragon marked in red on the mountain," said Balin. "But it will be easy enough to find him without that if ever we arrive there."
"There is one point you haven't noticed," said the wizard, "and that is a secret entrance. You see that rune on the west side, and the hand pointing to it from the other runes? That marks a hidden passage to the lower halls. Look at the map at the beginning of the book, and you will see the runes. If you haven't seen this famous picture, you can look it up yourself."
"It may have been secret once," said Thorin, "but how can we know that it is secret any longer?
Old Smaug has lived there long enough to find out anything there is to know about those caves."
"He may, but he can't have used it for years and years."
"Why?"
"Because it's too small. 5 feet high, the door, and 3 may walk abreast, say the runes. But Smaug could not creep into a hole that size, not even when he was a young dragon. Certainly not after devouring so many dwarves and men of Dale."
"It seems a great big hole to me," squeaked Bilbo. He had no experience of dragons, only of hobbit holes. He was getting excited and interested again, so he forgot to keep his mouth shut. He loved maps, and in the hall there hung a large one of the county road with all of his favorite walks marked in it on red ink. How could such a large door be kept secret from everybody outside and apart from the dragon? He asked. He was only a little hobbit, you must remember.
"In lots of ways," said Gandalf. "But in what way this one has been hidden we don't know without going to see. From what it says on the map, I should guess there is a closed door that has been made to look exactly like the side of the mountain. That is the usual dwarves' method. I think that's right, isn't it?"
"Quite right," said Thorin.
"Also," went on Gandalf, "I forgot to mention that the map went with a key. A small and curious key. Here it is," he said, and he handed it to Thorin, a key with a long barrel and intricate wards made of silver. "Keep it safe."
"Indeed I will," said Thorin, and fastened it upon the fine chain that hung about his neck and under his jacket. Now things start to look a bit more hopeful. This news alters them for the better. So far, we have no clear idea of what to do. We thought of going to the east, as quiet, as careful as we could, as far as the Long Lake. After that, trouble would begin.
"A long time before that, if I know anything about the roads east," interrupted Gandalf.
"We might go up there along the river running," went on Thorin, taking no notice, "and so to the ruins of Dale, to the old town in the valley where under the shadow of the mountain. But none of us like the idea of the front gate. But the river runs right out through the great cliff at the south of the mountain, and out of it comes the dragon, too. Far too often, unless he has changed his habits."
"That would be no good," said the wizard. "Not without a mighty warrior, or even a hero. I tried to find one, but warriors are busy fighting one or another in other lands, and this neighborhood's heroes are scarce, or simply not to be found. Swords in these parts are mostly blunt, and axes used for trees, and shields as cradles or dish covers, and dragons are comfortably far off, and therefore legendary, and that is why I settled on burglary, especially when I remembered the existence of a side door. And here is our little Bilbo Baggins, the burglar, the chosen and selected burglar. So now let's get on and make some plans. Very well, then, said Thorin. Supposing the burglar gives us some ideas or suggestions. He turned with mock politeness to Bilbo. First, I should like to know a bit more about things, said he, feeling all confused and a bit shaky, but so far still tookishly determined to go on with things. I mean, about the gold and the dragon and all that, and how it got to be there, and who it belongs to, and so on, and further. Bless me, said Thorin. Haven't you got the map? And didn't you hear our song? Haven't we been talking about this for hours? All the same, I should like it plain and clear, he said obstinately, putting on his business manner, usually reserved for people who tried to borrow money off of him, and doing his best to appear wise and prudent and professional and live up to Gandalf's recommendation. Also, I should like to know about risks, out-of-pocket expenses, time required, and remuneration, and so forth, by which he meant, what am I going to get out of it, and am I going to come back alive? Oh, very well, said Thorin. Long ago, in my grandfather's Thor time, our family was driven out from the far north and came back with all their wealth and their tools to the mountain on the map. It had been discovered by my ancestor, Thran, the Old, but now they mined and they tunneled and they made larger halls and greater workshops, and in addition, I believe they also found a good deal of gold and a great many jewels, too. Anyway, they grew immensely rich and famous, and my grandfather was king under the mountain again, and treated with great reverence by the mortal men who lived to the south, and they were gradually spreading up the running river as far as the valley overshadowed by the mountain. They built the merry town of Dale there in the old days. Kings used to send for our smiths and reward even the least skillful most richly. Fathers would beg us to take their sons as apprentices and pay us handsomely, especially in food supplies, which we never bothered to find for ourselves. Altogether, those were good days for us, and the poorest of us had money to spend and to lend, and leisure to make beautiful things just for the fun of it. Not to speak of the most marvelous and magical toys, the likes of which were not to be found in the world nowadays. So my grandfather's hall became full of armor and jewels and carvings and cups, and the toy market of Dale was the wonder of the North. Unfortunately, that was what brought the dragon. Dragons steal gold and jewels, you know, from men and elves and dwarves wherever they can find them, and they guard their plunder as long as they live, which is practically forever unless they're killed, and they never enjoy a brass ring of it. Indeed, they hardly know a good bit of work from bad, though they usually have a good notion of the current market value. And they can't make a thing for themselves, not even mend a little loose scale of their armor. There were lots of dragon in the north in those days, and gold was probably getting scarce up there, with the dwarves flying south or getting killed, and all the general waste and destruction that dragons make going from bad to worse. There was especially greedy, strong and wicked worm called Smaug. One day he flew up and into the air and came south, and first we heard it, there was a noise like a hurricane coming from the north, and the pine trees on the mountains creaking and cracking in the wind.
Some of the dwarves who happened to be outside, I was luckily a fine, adventurous lad in those days, always wandering about, and it saved my life that day. Well away from a good way off, we saw the dragons settle on the mountain in a spout of flame. Then they came down the slopes, and he reached the woods, and all went up in fire. By that time all the bells were ringing in Dale, and all the warriors were arming. The dwarves rushed out of their great gates, but the dragon was waiting for them. None of them escaped that way. The river rushed up in a steam of fog and destroyed most of the warriors. The usual unhappy story. It was only too common in those days. Then he went back and crept into the front gate and routed out all the halls and lanes and tunnels, alleys, cellars, mansions, and passages. And after that, there were no more dwarves left in the side, and he took all their wealth for himself. Probably, for this is the dragon's way, he has piled it all up in a great heap far inside, and he sleeps on it for a bed. Later, he used to crawl out of the great gate and come by night into Dale and carry away people, especially maidens, to eat, until Dale was ruined and all the people dead or gone. What goes on there now, I don't know for certain. But I don't suppose anyone lives nearer to the mountain than the far edge of the long lake nowadays. The few of us that were outside sat and wept in hiding and cursed Smaug, and there were unexpectedly joined by my father and my grandfather, with singed beards, and they looked very grim, but they said very little. When I asked how they got away, they told me to hold my tongue, and said that one day in the proper time I would know. And after that we went away, and we have had to earn our living as best we could, up and down the lands, often sinking low enough as blacksmith work or even coal mining. But we have never forgotten our stolen treasure, and even now, when I will allow that we have had a good bit laid off and are not so badly off, said Thorin, stroking the gold chain around his neck, we still mean to get it back, and to bring our curses home to Smaug, if we can. I have often wondered about my father and my grandfather's escape. I see now they must have had a private side door, which only they knew about. But apparently they made a map, and I should like to know how you got hold of it, Gandalf, and why it did not come to me, their rightful heir. I did not get hold of it. I was given it, said the wizard. Your grandfather Thror was killed, you remember, in the mines of Moria by Azog the Goblin. Curse his name, yes, said Thorin. And Thrawn, your father, went far away on a 21st of April, 100 years ago last Thursday, and was never been seen by you since. True, said Thorin. Well, your father gave me this to give to you, and if I was ever chose by my own time and way for handing it over, you could hardly blame me, considering the trouble I had to find you. Your father could not remember his own name when he gave me the paper, and he never told me yours. So on the whole, I think I ought to be praised and thanked. Here it is, and he handed the map to Thorin. And there we will end part 4, and to hear the end of chapter 1, tune in for part 5. Thank you so much for watching Role Play Riot.